Hey guys, Matthew here. So in this video I'm going to talk to you about how to set up a sun in your file. So this is really useful when you're doing external renders, but it's also important when you're doing interior rendering during the day, because a lot of the light that kind of enters a room actually still does come somehow from the sun and the environment that the room is within. So having a look at our V-Ray asset editor, we have the materials, lights and geometry tabs. I'm just going to click on the lights tab, and you'll see that by default there's something here called the Rhino document sun. Now that's all well and good, it's there, but the problem is that by default the sun isn't actually kind of turned on in Rhino. So if we go to our command line and type in sun, we can turn the sun on by just clicking this on box. And now you have two options. You can either control it manually, where you can give it actual manual inputs for the azimuth or the altitude, or the far easier way is to click about where you are on this map. So I can move all the way around the world, but seeing that we are in Sydney, Australia, or at least I am right now, I'm going to select that because that's likely where my project will be. And once I've selected the location, I can then choose what time of year and what time of day. So for example, if I choose August midday, somewhere in August midday, doesn't matter, and now I come here and I press render, and we're back. Now you'll notice that when you press render, the entire scene comes off being almost completely white, except for this one little edge here. And if you think about this, it does make an extraordinary amount of sense. So we were rendering before. I can click on the images that we saved out previously, and we were getting kind of geometry being visually defined to us. We could see what we were rendering. And now we've just added a massive burning ball of gas that is emitting an insane amount of light into the scene, so you'd expect everything to become more washed out. So what we have to do is actually control the camera's exposure in order to get it to render more accurately. So if we go back to our asset editor and we look at our settings, you'll notice that we have a option under camera that talks about exposure. An exposure of 10 is actually letting in a fair bit of light. So I'm going to change that to 15, and I'm going to give it another render. And we're back. And you'll notice with an exposure value of 15, we get a lot more detail on the geometry. Everything's not completely blown out. Now, I'm not saying that an exposure value of 15 is the exact number you want to use when you're producing a render, but clearly between here, if we want to say that this is a bit too dark and an exposure value of 10 is way too bright, then that number would sit somewhere in between. So you should sit there and play with this exposure value in order to get the exact kind of lighting quality that you want to describe whatever atmosphere or technical aspect of a project that you're trying to convey. Now, going back to our image here, you'll notice that the sky is not a sky at all. And this is actually a problem, because the way that lighting works from the sun is that you get light from the sun directly, the light coming from the sun and hitting the ground or hitting you or hitting the building. And we also have the light from the sun that gets diffracted and refracted through the atmosphere and allows the sky itself to also have a possible lighting quality. And at the moment, this is not what's happening. So we want to actually put a physically accurate sky into the scene so that our lighting quality is a little bit better. So I'm going to scroll down here, and under the environment section, you'll notice that there's this blue checker box with a tick, which means that I'm referring to a texture instead of a color value, and I'm just going to click on the checker box, and you'll notice that it references a bitmap file, which can be found somewhere on the hard drive with all this grey and white stuff, which is what's giving us this particular sky color. I'm going to click on this series of lines here. I'm going to change it from bitmap to sky, and you'll see here that it says sky, and that's referencing the Rhino document sun. All of this is fairly fine, and I'm just going to go back for now. I'm going to click it again, just make sure the sky's set up, and I'm going to give it another render. And we're back. And you'll notice that we have a blue sky, and actually the colors are like picking up some of that light as well. So if we do an A-B vertical split to look at that in our previous render, you'll notice that there is a difference in the color of the walls here, and there's also a difference in the kind of color of the bright areas as well, being slightly cooler in tone. So that's how we begin to add a sun to the scene. Now, if we wanted to say change the location of the sun to 5 p.m. on February, we can do that, and you can re-render it, and you'll get a very different kind of aesthetic in your image, right? So lighting is very, very important. Now, I recommend before we move forward that you sit there and play with the sun and choose a particular time of day if you have a file you're working on that you're kind of happy with. And I'm going to do the same thing before I start the next video. So see you in the next video.